There is a lot of vitriol being hurled back and forth between President Trump and his critics in the media and politics and elsewhere. But often this is covered as it's just Donald Trump who is shattering the norms, using street language, calling people idiots and fools and morons, SOBs, and in the case of the media, dishonest, corrupt, and scum. But it really is a two-way battle. I really kind of wrestled with this when I was writing my new book, Media Madness, which is just the tone of the vitriol against this president from journalists, commentators, from sports people, entertainers, celebrities, and just about everyone else, cultural folks. And at the same time, you know, they can say, well, look, the president is not shy about punching back at us, and we're entitled to return fire. And I thought about all this, a fascinating piece in National Review by the writer Victor Davis Hanson, who essentially suggests that the president's critics are mimicking his tactics in using this kind of no-holds-barred approach. So he writes, anti- and never-Trump op-ed writers have long ago run out of superlatives. Trump is the worst, most, biggest, fill in the blank, in the history of the presidency, history of the world, even worse than Mao, Mussolini, Stalin, or Hitler. So if Trump is a Hitler who gassed 6 million or Stalin who starved 20 million, then logically Trump deserves what exactly? Hansen goes on to talk about the media delegitimizing the president, and he says, and I've talked about this and written about this, everything from NFL to late-night comedy shows have become Trump-hating venues. But again, you got to look at the other side. The president, you know, he says he's a counterpuncher, but he counterpunches pretty hard, calling the New York Times evil, and, you know, a million other examples. So I wonder whether or not there's enough focus on the fact that this is a two-sided scorched earth battle. So I found something else on this kind of related. It was a Politico editor-in-chief, John Harris, talking to an old friend, James Bennett, the editorial page editor of the New York Times. And they got into, is it, whose fault is it? Is it the media's fault? Is it Trump's fault? And Harris writes that while Bennett believes that Trump has made things so much worse, John Harris, again, the guy who runs Politico, argues that these are really self-inflicted wounds. And he says, the media industry has gotten taken over by a noise industry in which the enormous financial incentives, ego incentives, reward the discourse that doesn't have much to do with getting at the truth or with solving problems. And that really has the ring of truth to me. And I think all sides, we all know shows, networks, websites on the left and the right that do this, where, you know, yelling at people, having these sort of hot button issues, and, you know, not, and, you know, paying more attention to the argument and the heat than providing light. That does seem to be a pretty dominant business model in the media these days. And Harris says, and I agree, that it predates Donald Trump. You can't blame it on Trump. What some people say as well, you know, Trump has made the climate so much worse, so much cruder that we have to respond. Actually, no, you don't. You can certainly aggressively cover this president and criticize this president as you see fit without falling into the trap of using incredibly inflammatory and harsh language and terms, and he's mentally ill and worse than Hitler, as Hansen says. So I think all of this is an interesting debate, a worthy debate, because we're going to have a few more years of this at the very least, and, you know, how the media conduct themselves and how they frame these debates and the kind of language they use and the kind of rhetoric they use and the kind of vitriol that some members of the media are using. Forget about what President Trump does. I mean, he'll be held accountable by people out there. Americans are smart. Some like him, some don't like him. They can figure it out. But how we conduct ourselves has really become a big challenge in the Trump era.